Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of my podcast, Finding Your Place. My name is Elena. I'm 24 years old and I live in London. Thank you for listening to this podcast. This is a podcast about people and their stories that I hope are gonna help you to find your place in this world. In this podcast, I will interview people from all around the world to find out how they found their place, a place to call home. So, a little bit of background about me. I live in London for already 5 years, almost 5 years, 4 years and something. And I really love this place. I think it's such a wonderful city. I currently work as social media manager in a creative agency, and I absolutely love it. And I would love to share with you my story. So keep listening. I'm originally from Moldova, and for those of you who don't know where Moldova is, or what Moldova is, it's a country. I used to say tiny, but it's not very tiny. It's a what's maybe small country. I don't know. Depends where you are right now. It's a country situated between Romania and Ukraine, and because of our history, we have a very mixed background, and Moldova actually shares some history with Romania and also some history with Russia. So because of this, we've got a very interesting culture, and we celebrate Christmas twice a year. And we celebrate New Year's twice a year, and our Easter is not exactly when the European Easter is, but we do celebrate Easter sometimes as well, not just sometimes, always. So coming back to my story of finding my place, the whole story with me moving abroad actually started when I was 12. I knew I wanted to move abroad when I was 12, and I was asking my parents to let me do this. I was convincing them to let me move to UK and study here, but they thought it was too early. So I had to wait. I had to wait until I was 18, and I know what you were all thinking. Yeah, she turned 18 and then she moved to London straight away. She thought that's a great place. I wish, and I actually don't wish that was the case, but when I graduated high school, I moved to Prague, and the whole story of choosing Prague to move there was that I had a friend with whom I was applying to universities, and when looking at our options, UK, by the way, wasn't a choice because it was very expensive to go to study in UK for a Moldavian citizen, and we had to look at something that is more affordable, and on the list there were a couple of countries, and one of them was Czech Republic. So we looked at universities that were there because we were planning to study, and one of them was Anglo-American University in Prague, which I graduated a couple of years ago. So we chose Anglo-American University because it was more American than Anglo, and because it was quite affordable. Prague was a quite cheap location comparing to everything else. It was closer to home, and our parents felt like that was a good destination. So when I moved to Prague, I just had a plan of I'm gonna be there for 3 years, gonna graduate, and after that have no idea where I'm gonna get. But Prague was never an end destination. It was always something to just in between to get me closer to my dreams. So after I graduated university there, and Prague was awesome, by the way. If any of you are thinking to move to Prague, I can tell you, at least as a location for students, it was really, really cool. The culture there is very interesting, but we can talk about that in another episode where I'm gonna invite some of my friends who are living in Prague, and they can tell us about their experience. So As I said, I graduated university and I literally had no plan. My plan before graduation was to move to Denmark to study there at one of the top universities in the world, because I knew that if I want to move to London at some point, I need to have a degree at one of the top 20 universities. And yeah, back in time, Copenhagen School of Business was one of the universities that were in top 10, and also as a Romanian citizen that I was back then, I could study there for free, and it sounded really, really attractive to me. But one day before the deadline for applying to the university, I found out that my mom, who had literally one single job to do, signed some papers, didn't sign the papers, and it was already too late to sign them. And I found out that I missed the deadline for applying to the university that was about to guarantee me a successful career. So all my plans were literally diminished. Like, all my plans were fell down. They just disappeared in a second. I just remembered that day, I was working in Hard Rock Cafe in Prague. Cheers to everyone listening from Hard Rock. So I was working in Hard Rock Cafe in Prague, as a cashier actually, and I was taking customers and taking their cash and crying. And I was crying so badly. It was awful. Like, some customers came to me and asked me if I'm ill, or some of them asked me if I had cancer or somebody died. But yeah, I was still working because my supervisor told me that we don't have anyone else to do my job, so I have to go through this and finish my working day. And I remember me that day was literally feeling like life has no meaning. I lost all my chances. I don't have a plan. I was really lost. I didn't know what to do after Prague, and I was feeling really upset because all my dreams just got ruined in one day, in 1 second, just because my mom didn't sign some documents. It felt awful, honestly. But yeah, I think that March I realized that it's okay sometimes to go with no plans and just to go with the flow. And I thought about a plan B, and then I decided to apply for a job in Malta, and I've got accepted to that job. So after graduation, I kind of managed to get a quite good stable plan. So I moved back home for the summer, chilled a little bit because all the summers during university I actually was working. So I thought I'm gonna take a break this summer, and then in September I'm moving to Malta, working for this job for a couple of months, and then at some point probably would move somewhere else, because Malta for me was also like Prague, like a transitional place. I wouldn't say that it was always like a destination where I wanted to live, but it was a good place because I never lived by the sea, and I thought it's such a beautiful destination to go to. By the way, for those of you who don't know where Malta is, it's not Moldova, it's Malta. Big difference. Malta is a tiny island. It's not, why I keep saying tiny? It's not very tiny. It's a good size island. Somewhere in very south of Italy, very, very south. Beautiful island. I actually visited it a couple of years ago. Yeah. And yeah, I totally recommend seeing it. So coming back to the story, had a plan B, was planning to move to Malta in September. And one day before my flight, I messaged, exactly one day, like the day before the flight, I messaging my manager, and I'm like, hey, how are you doing? Everything fine? They're like, yeah, cool. I'm like, could you please send me the address of my flat? So tomorrow when I get there, I could just take an Uber and get there. And he was like, replying to my email, being like, which flat? I'm like, the flat that you guys booked it for me, that you sent me pictures of just a couple of weeks ago, And they're like, well, we didn't arrange for a flat for you. I was like, guys, you sent me an email, I'm forwarding the email and everything. And it turned out that they they did a mistake and they gave my flat to another girl. And actually, I didn't have a place to stay. And the option was that I could take an Airbnb, but they wouldn't pay for me. And the Airbnbs were so expensive. They were so expensive that when I told my mom, she was like, I don't get why you need to move to Malta. You could be cheap labor in Moldova, actually. So one day, the day before my flight, literally, I made the choice that I'm not gonna go to Malta. So here I am again, back at my point A, the same situation I had in March. I had no plan of what to do after university. I was a student with a degree, with a marketing degree, that didn't have a job or a plan and didn't know what to do next. I knew that I didn't want to stay in Moldova for sure because I always felt like an alien there, and spending summer was nice, but I felt like that's not my end point. So after a couple of weeks, I started talking to a guy who turns out to be Australian and who lived in Poland, and he came to visit Moldova, and in between things we kind of started to see each other, and I came to visit him in Poland. Very long story, and this is not a podcast about relationships, although we could talk about it sometime. Anyway, I'm thinking that I want to move to Poland. Of course, because he was there, I was so lost actually at that point that I felt I just needed a reason to move somewhere else, to try something else. So I applied for a couple of jobs in Poland, and I've passed some interviews, and I actually got a job offer at Brown Brothers Harrison's, which is an investment company, I believe so. And when I was discussing with my dad and I was like telling him that I got a job in Poland, in Krakow, he looked at me and he's like, and what's the salary? And you probably don't know, but I'm gonna tell you, my parents are very old mentality, very conservative and very straight to the point. Money are important. And my dad looked at me, it was the first time when he actually told me this. 700 years, he told me? You could get that here. I really don't get why would you move for that? I thought you know your value. And that's exactly when I understood that I know my value, and Krakow was definitely not a good option. So I refused the job. Also, I refused it because my best friend at that time looked at me and she's like, I know, darling, you don't want to move there. But you should follow your heart. And I was like, okay, but where shall I move next if not there? And she looked at me and she told me, I just don't get one thing. Why don't you move to London? You always wanted to move there. You always was telling everyone that you're gonna move there one day. I mean, London eventually was your end point. And I was like, she is right. It took me just a couple of hours probably to get the ticket, to fly to London, and to get here. And actually, if you think what was my first impression of London, I would tell you that when I moved here, that wasn't the day when I had the first impression of London, because when I moved to Prague, I did a huge mistake that I didn't know how Prague was because I didn't visit before moving. But when I moved to London, it was my fourth time already flying to this country. So I already had an idea of what London is like. And I need to say that if this is my first, probably, or second tip on this podcast, the tip that I can give you is, before moving somewhere, go and visit first. And obviously my impressions from my first trip and my impressions right now are so different. It's probably the novelty in the first day, when you visit. It's probably like it looked so shiny, it looked so different. I remember my first trip on the bus when I was like in London for the first time a tourist. I was so shocked. I was like, oh my god, buses with 2 floors. They do exist. And every single bus is red. Incredible. And now I'm like, oh, another red bus, But that was a good like tip. I wished I knew about that. Somebody told me that before I moved to other cities. My best friend actually influenced my decision to move here. And although we are not friends anymore, I'm forever thankful for the role she played in my life. And now when I'm thinking about that kid at 12 years old, the kid that wanted to move abroad, and what my best friend reminded me years later was that I was always saying that I'm going to move to London, and I was always saying that I'm going to move to London to do acting. Funny enough, I'm not doing acting, not regretting it at all because I love my job. But I need to admit, London was on my list. London was my dream, and I made it. And when people ask me, how do I feel here, or do I feel like it was a good decision? I totally think so, because at the end I made it here. So probably it would be important for you to know my perspective on London and what makes London so nice for me. So I always tell people that one thing that I actually hate about London is how overpopulated it is. And I know it's COVID times right now, and I'm not going to talk about COVID times because I'm sure you guys are probably tired already of talking about it. But normally there's so many people around, so many people on the tube, so many people everywhere. And I actually, funny enough, I hate this, but I love this as well. I just love that there are so many people. I think this is great. It's great because it increases your chances to meet friends that are awesome, because there's more variety. And I know you probably think it doesn't kind of make sense because it makes it more complicated, because like more people you need to know and so on in order to find your perfect fit. But I think it's the same thing as like, I don't know, buying a lottery ticket. Like, more tickets you buy, the more chances you get to win, so increase your chances. So yeah, I think it's the overpopulated city situation is an advantage and a disadvantage about London. Although this disadvantage can be easily turned in an advantage, I think the problem of this overpopulated city is that because of this, the turnaround of people, the thing is that because there are so many options, people somehow don't keep the connections. Because you meet somebody today and you're like, oh, we should keep up, we'll keep in touch, and that person might be genuine, like she really wants to meet you the other time, but because probably she has so many friends, because there's so many people here, you just get forgotten because there's so many options as well. So I think on emotional level, it's really difficult to connect with people just because there's so many people. And I absolutely hate this on this side. I just feel sometimes this city loses all, the good emotional values about it. I actually heard that this is not just a London problem. So the good news is that this is a problem that all big cities are facing. I can't tell you if that's true or not yet, because London has been the only big city that I lived in. But we'll get some guests around and we'll find out. I promise you. I think another thing that I really hate with a passion about London is the fact that there are not so many trash bins on the street, And I know what you're thinking of, like this is such a random fact, but no, that's true. Like I am facing the problem of, throwing trash where it's supposed to be thrown to. So yeah, the city is a little bit dirty, I would say, and oh damn it, I really don't like it. But hopefully the situation is gonna get better. Yeah, so I promised myself that normally I would limit to 3 disadvantages in every episode. But I just can't hold to the 4th disadvantage that I really feel, because I lived in Prague before, it's really important to highlight it. So one thing that I really loved about Prague was its transportation. The public transportation is just great. It's on time, it's super cheap. Like for a student it was like 10 euros a month to use it unlimited time and to go whatever you wanted, what hour you wanted. The night transportation was great and so on. I think for adults it was something around 40 euros, which is still not a lot, but honestly it was great transportation, and I think that made people use it more there. And I think the problem in London is that the transportation is so bloody expensive. Honestly, I used to live a long time ago. Used to live in Zone 6 and I used to work in Zone 1. And although that wasn't a long trip, it was 35 minutes probably trip. I used to pay for one-way ticket something around like £5 and something, which was roughly like 6 or 7 years, and that was just one way. So double that, because it's twice a day you need to do it. It was like 14 euros a day, which I think it's a lot. So yeah, I really hate it. And I think the good thing about Prague was that because transportation was so cheap, everyone was using it. So automatically the carbon footprint was like lower. But I think here, like, because the transportation is so expensive, people tend to use private cars. And it's not their own cars, obviously. And it's not just like, because it's so pricey or something. It's also because it's so inconvenient. Like, I remember in Prague, you just get to your next station, which is like 6-7 minutes walking. You get on the tram, 20 minutes, you're everywhere. Like, super nice and easy. Here, these buses are terrible. They barely work. There are always like some work on the lines and stuff like that. So I think it gives great initiative to people to not use it. So whoever is the mayor of London, if you're listening on this podcast by any chance, could you please make some effort and improve it? Like putting the fee up for the congestion charge or ULEZ zone or whatever you're doing, it's not helping. What you need to do is actually make the public transport more reliable, so more people use it. It's basic economics, come on. So yeah, that was my last disadvantage, I promise. But now we're going to talk about the cool stuff, the things that I absolutely love about London. And we'll start with my favorite thing ever, and it's the fact that London lives 24 hours. Obviously, in normal times, not COVID times, and hopefully we'll return to that normality at some point. But I think that's a great thing. I think the fact that it's always so dynamic. It's if you want to go out, if you want to club, you can club anytime. Like in London, any day of the week. Monday, no problem. Tuesday, no problem. Like anytime, literally. And I think that's great. I think That's beautiful. Back to the beautiful things, I think another awesome thing about London is its diversity. I know I said about a lot of people, but I think London is also diverse in culture. It's embracing, it's mostly embracing any culture that's coming here, and I think the greatest thing about it, that's what I love the most. And I looked, researched, and found out that London is I think one of the few cities, and why probably even the most diverse city in the world, where there's the most diverse nationalities, cultures, and so on. And I think what I love about London, and specifically about this, is that somehow, because the city is so big, all the cultures created their own communities, their own, like, you go to somewhere in north, and there is a Jewish part of London, or somewhere in other part of the city, and you find it more like Turkish shops and a Turkish community, and so on, about Italian shops, Italian community, Italian restaurants. And I think that's beautiful. Because the city is so big, and because it has so many options, you can choose your own city, and you can build your own London by choosing to live in a separate area, choosing to live in a specific to live in a specific location, and choosing to work in a specific location, because the city is so diverse, and you have so many options. You end up having your own version of London, and I think that's beautiful. I didn't see this anywhere else, and I think that's what I've been sold on London. But also because it's so diverse in terms of the cultures and so on. Sadly, you'd never know what to expect from it. For example, this is a little bit of a sad story. About 2 years ago, my cousin passed away, and I found out about it. And it was something very difficult. And this is not a podcast to talk about it, but when I found out, I obviously started crying straight away, and I was going to see my bestie and spend some time with her. So I was on a tube, and I was crying, and I was so tired. I wasn't crying hysterically with words or something. I was just crying like a normal person. Very sad timings. And I remember a woman came to me and didn't say anything, just gave me a couple of napkins and asked me if I need help. I said no, I'm fine, thank you. She gave me napkins, and she went, and she told me, I hope you're gonna be okay. And actually this didn't happen just once. Also, it happened another time. I broke up with my ex. Why I always cry when I'm moving? Like, I see a path here, and I promise I'll stop. But anyway, I broke up with my ex, and I was going home, walking, literally. And I was crying again. And this lady, super lovely lady on the street, she stopped me, and she told me, whatever you feel, it's okay to feel now. You're beautiful. You're gonna go for it. You're a strong woman, I'm sure. You're gonna be fine. And she gave me a napkin as well. And she asked me if I'm fine. I said, yeah, I'm okay. She was like, can you get home? I was like, yeah, I can get home. And she let me go home. And I felt very nice about it. And it wasn't only in situations like this. I think people in London are quite nice most of the time. At least that's what I hope I see. Once I remember I was on the train, like trying to jump on a very crowded train, and this woman, like, she was walking towards the platform, and she saw me, and she was like, hey, you girl. And I was like looking around, there were so many girls, I didn't know if it was me. She's like, yeah, you with the pink shoes. And I was with the pink shoes. She's like, pink shiny shoes. I was like, yep, that's me. What did I do? And then she was like, very nice shoes. You look lovely. And I felt so good. It felt so great, actually. I felt like people here are nice. And I had it many times on the streets, but when I said diverse is that, yeah, this happened quite a lot here. But also just a couple of days ago, I actually got convinced that it happens also the opposite. So long story short, I found this guy, lying next to an wall, like he was on the floor. And I got really scared and I didn't know what to do. And I stopped somebody in the street. I was like, can you help me? To call an ambulance or something. He was drunk, probably. But he looked fine. He didn't look homeless or anything. So, and I was asking this woman for help. And she was properly dressed, like nice, intelligent woman. And she's like, oh, leave him here. Like, don't worry, go home. Yeah, I'm not gonna tell you the whole story what happened, but you can ask me and I'll answer in the comments. But no, I felt really bad. I feel like people actually don't want to help other people here. I have this section where I'm gonna be talking about what people should know before moving here. So I think the most important thing that they need to know before moving is that London is expensive. And when people say London is expensive, they're not joking. Like, it's one of the most expensive cities in like Europe. And yeah, the price level is quite high, and it's okay if you're earning okay, but because the city is so expensive and because there's so many people, it takes longer to build other things in life. As an example of my friends at home back in Moldova, they're all married with families and kids and houses and cars, and it's not because they're super rich and because they work in highly paid job. Although I'm really proud of most of them because they did really great. But it's mostly because the price of level in Moldova is quite different, and it's a little bit easier to have a family, and the expenses are a little bit different. Although even Moldova is quite pricey, but I think compared to London, it's just easier to do these things. I think in London, when my parents, for example, my mom is like, yeah, so are you planning to have some kids? And I'm like, Mom, do you realize that I can't maintain myself right now? How the fuck do you think I'm gonna have money to pay for my kids? But yeah, it's just, I think in London, it generally, these things comes at a later point in your life, like getting a house, settling down, because it is really expensive. In terms of alcohol, because a lot of people ask me how expensive is the alcohol. I would say it's more expensive than Prague. If you didn't know, alcohol in Prague is super cheap. Like, I remember a beer was something around €1 when I was a student, so it was super cheap. But it's not as expensive as Sweden and London. So, for your reference, a glass of wine can be something around £6, which is fine, which is totally okay considering that you don't drink that much. But talking about drinking, what you need to know before moving here is that there is a culture for drinking. So UK, I think they have this thing where they're like, oh, we should go for a drink. That's their way of, we should hang out. It's literally, oh, we should go for a drink. And there are many ways of going for a drink. A quick one, a proper drinking, out, and so on. And I think that's something that I can touch base with some of my guests on the podcast later, but generally you should know about that before moving here. Also, before moving to London, and as a tip generally, I would recommend getting a flat quite close to work, because if you don't do that, you might end up like me first year in London and committing a whole hour to get to work. Oh, it wasn't even an hour, it was an hour and a half, and an hour and a half back, just because it wasn't that far away, the work from home, but because the connection was really bad, I had to change to buses. And as I told you, buses here are terrible. So yeah, totally recommend checking the distance between home and work. That's certainly a good tip. Otherwise, if have any questions related to moving to London, feel free to drop it in comment section and I'll reply. We'll start with the interesting bit, I think, the cultural shock. And I think because I'll have some guests from other countries that moved to London as well, and they're going to talk about their experience. But I think what is important is to talk about my experience as a Moldovan girl in London, and to talk about what was my shocked and when did I got shooketh. So I think the perfect example to explain this was when my parents came here, and my parents are quite an old generation, and I said, like, they're very conservative. They traveled a lot in Europe. They've been everywhere almost except London. So 2 years ago they came to visit me, and they got on public transportation and they got scared. They were like, oh my god, how do you use it? Do you really have to change to trains? And I was like, Mom, it's actually free. Oh, that's even worse. Oh, no, you should move back home. You can get a car there and just go to work. It's like, that's okay, Mom, don't worry. Also, my mom was like, that's disgustingly dirty. Like, you have rats in your metro tube. And I was like, yeah, Mom, yeah, rats are walking there, like they're home, but that's fine. They don't touch you, trust me. So I think it's quite funny story. My parents actually found the public transportation quite difficult to use, and I don't blame them. It is difficult. I mean, using all these cards and stuff, but thanks God, there are many apps here, and I think that's what we also love about London, is that we have an app for literally everything, because the city is so well developed in terms of technology and everything. I think it's so advanced, everything here. You've got everything on the market, so that's what I think saves us. And I think another shock that I had, because after Prague, I came to London, I was like, oh, it's quite okay, like, because everyone kept telling me about how food is not very good here, and I was like, oh no, I'm sure it's okay. Like, I mean, the same thing people told me about Prague, and it turned out to be quite okay. And I remember I came here and I went to buy some vegetables and fruits, and I was like, I ate an apple, and I was like, oh my god, that doesn't taste like anything. It tastes like nothing, like water. I was so disappointed, and I was like, oh, I wish I had some apples from Moldova. Technically that's what my mom does. She sends me apples from Moldova. I swear to God, I'm probably the only one person on this earth who, when their parents ask them what they want to get from them, usually kids are like, oh, give me some money or give me that present. I'm like, Dad, can you send me some apples? Literally, that's so funny. So yeah, that's what I'm missing from Moldova, the fruit and vegetables. Also, I need to admit, one thing that I really don't get here is this culture of hooking up. And it's not that I don't get it or I blame it, but because I'm coming from, as I said, conservative family, and I think generally in Moldova it's you don't talk about sex and hooking up and things like that, so it's not very open. And when I came here, and I remember, like, I went on a date, and not even on a date, no, I went clubbing, and then we ended up going for a drink after something, and my friend asked me next day if I got laid, and I looked at her and was like, what do you mean? She's like, no, but did you get laid? I was like, no, but what do you mean? What does that mean? She's like, oh, you don't know what's that? I was like, no. And then I had to Google, and she's like, so? I was like, oh no, well, that's not okay. I don't do that. And she's like, yeah, what? She's like, oh, that's nothing here to be ashamed of. Just be honest with me. I'm your friend. I was like, no, seriously, we don't do that. She's like, nothing wrong here. Honestly, don't worry. I was like, no, but I don't do that. And it was, it was a little bit funny. But yeah, I think that was my shocked. But I think I do understand why this comes from, because the city is so big, people just do one-time thing because they know that the chances of them eating again here, they're really low. So, as a tradition, I would like to finish this podcast every episode with a question, and this time is me asking myself, does London feel like home? And my current answer is, I don't know. It certainly feels nice. It feels better than what I knew as a home in Moldova. But I think I come to the realization that I don't know what home is, because the world is so broad and there are so many things that I want to experience. So I don't know what exactly is a home, because now when I go to Moldova, I don't feel like home there. But I don't feel completely home here as well. I feel definitely better here than in Prague, and it feels more homey than in Prague, than in Moldova. But I'm still not sure if this is the home. So stay with me, and I'll keep you updated. Thank you for listening this podcast. Please subscribe to it. I promise I'll deliver you fresh episodes every week. Also, if you have any questions, just comment, or feel free to message me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Elena Livadarum. And have an awesome weekend, and good luck with finding your place.